Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome. This is Nur al-Huda, and you're listening to my review of Helene Althusser, a book written by Francis Dupuis-Déri and translated by Melissa Bull. It was published by Between the Lines in July 2025. Between the Lines is a member of Literary Press Group of Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about Between the Lines Publishing House. There's something very unique about it, and I would like to share it with all of you. On its website, the publishing house defines itself as, quote, a social movement press that publishes non-fiction books that expose and challenge oppression in our society. We aim to amplify the struggles of Black, indigenous, and racialized communities, migrants, women, queer folks, and working-class people. BTL is proudly left-wing, and the books we publish reflect our activist roots and our commitment to social justice struggles. BTL authors are academics, journalists, artists, and activists. All our authors hope their books will spark political and social change. Unquote. I'm reading from the BTL website. BTL further states its mission as, quote, as a product of new left radicalism, BTL embodies the cooperative and democratic ideals of its founders. BTL has no boss, no individual owner. We are run by a small staff and a dedicated volunteer editorial committee. Decisions on what we publish are made by consensus. We publish books not to seek profit, but to document and promote struggles for a better world, challenge the mainstream, and offer readers new perspectives on critical political issues. Our press is situated in Tekaronto, traditional Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee territory subject to the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. This land was stewarded by the Mississauga of the Credit River, that's a First Nations tribe, and is home to many indigenous peoples, including the Métis and those displaced from their homelands by Canadian extractive and other industries. Together we share a responsibility to care for and nurture these lands and to struggle for a better future for the earth and all peoples. Unquote. So it's obvious that their office or printing press is located in indigenous tribal land. I looked up on the internet, and here is a map of the area covered and identified as Dish with One Spoon land. Dish with One Spoon literally means sharing the resources of the land and conserving it with other nations or people who live on it. And at first, as I've come to understand, this treaty was between two tribes, but now is seen as a covenant between all of the indigenous tribes as well as the settlers, migrants, and the Canadian government. The area includes part of Ontario, moving along freshwater lakes, and it borders Quebec. This is a beautiful idea that makes people stewards and protectors of the land, makes them responsible for its maintenance and growth, by not just taking but also giving something back to it, and allows them, whether local people or newcomers, to benefit from it equally, peacefully, in a just manner, without discrimination. Under this idea in treaty, nobody is deemed superior or disrespected. Nobody's rights are usurped, and everyone gets a piece of the pie, so to speak. Nothing gets wasted because you are only taking what you need, and you are sharing the rest with others. The world, and dare I say it, Pakistan, needs more of this on an institutional level, and it's no surprise that indigenous people, more rooted in nature and less in commerce, came up with it and practiced it long before foreigners commodified and scavenged the Americas as conquerors. You can learn more about this treaty by going to Canadian Encyclopedia website or checking out multiple YouTube videos on the subject. I'm sharing a few on the screen and in the description box below. Coming back to the publisher of Helene Althusser, Between the Lines, as unconventional a concept of publishing as it may have, on its website it says that it has published more than 300 titles since its inception 48 years ago. And now to Francis Dupuis-Déri's book itself. Way back in 1980, a famous French philosopher killed his partner of 30 years after she told him she did not want to live with him anymore. He got away with it, citing mental illness that he had battled all his life, with frequent hospitalization. The media and literary brass supported him. He wrote a memoir, spent some time in a psychiatric institution, and then died a natural death. Bottom line, he never served any time in prison for the murder. He wasn't cancelled as people are nowadays. His work is still critiqued and discussed. He is, after all, one of the most influential thinkers on Marxism. His name is Louis Althusser, and I think by titling his book Killer Althusser, author Francis Dupuis-Déri wants people to identify the revered professor as a killer too, removing all the other labels that served to protect him during his lifetime. He strangled his wife Helene Althusser in the early morning hours of November 16, 1980, and I found a news report on YouTube that originally aired on a French TV channel on 17th of November, a day later. The 1-minute 37-second package is full of pictures of Althusser taken by Daniel Levy. There is not a single picture of the victim, the killed wife, Helene Althusser, in it. I find it unusual that she is not covered or spoken of in the report. As the author Dupuis-Déri notes in the book, the widely respected and influential daily newspaper Le Monde wrote on 19th November 1980 about how studying the mental disorder could help explain the murder, in effect presenting an explanation for his actions before the esteemed professor was put to any sort of judicial process. It is this erasure, this determination that the real victim of the killing was not the long-suffering wife, but rather the great intellectual himself, is what infuriates Dupuis-Déri. In the chapter titled Conclusion, on page 56, he calls Althusser, quote, banal, just another woman killer, unquote. There were no obvious signs of struggle or violence on Helene, and only an autopsy revealed the strangulation. But Althusser was not checked either for scratches or signs on his body that she put up a fight, because he was immediately placed in a mental hospital by the staff of his prestigious university, and by the time the police came, he was long gone. A judge went to the hospital to tell him that he was being charged with voluntary homicide, but the judge was told by staff that Althusser was in no position to be served with a warrant, since he was mentally fragile, in fact, quote, in a state of total mental collapse, and was incapable of understanding the legal procedure, unquote. This is given on page 7 of the autobiography that was published by Vintage in 1994. I've taken the basic information from that autobiography. The judge ordered 3 psychiatrists to gauge whether he was sane or insane at the time of commission of the crime, as well as whether he was mentally competent to understand the charge against him. 2 months later, on the basis of their reports, the judge dismissed the case. As given on page 7 of the introduction of the twin autobiography published by Vintage in 1994, the quote is, in French terms, he was declared a non-lieu. In English, the term non-suit or no grounds is usually used, that is a refusal to order prosecution, unquote. Hence, Dupuis-Déri considers this case to be, quote, a social revealer, as by revisiting this crime, and particularly by examining the public discourse around the crime, we can see how a network of male protection and solidarity established to benefit the killer makes it possible to highlight the hidden strategies of male violence against women, unquote, as given on page 3 of the introduction of Killer Althusser. Francis Dupuis-Déri himself is a political science professor and researcher at the Institute for Feminist Research and Studies of the University of Quebec in Montreal. He has written about incels, toxic masculinity, and rise of masculinist terrorism in a French-titled book, which I'm just going to say in English, The Crisis of Masculinity, Autopsy of Tenacious Myth. It's a 2022 publication. You can check out his interviews on YouTube. They are in French, so you'll have to go to Settings for auto-translation into your language of choice. Killer Althusser is translated into English by Melissa Bull. I cannot comment on the quality of the translation, but the book reads more like a PhD dissertation than a work of narrative nonfiction. It's a frosty research paper in which Dupuis-Déri coldly studies the contours of what Althusser said about the crime, how the French press and cultural and literary elite protected him and his status, not just from prosecution, but even from condemnation. He also analyzes that ultimate question: can the philosopher be separated from the murderer? A documentary on the development of Louis Althusser's ideological framework is available online. It has proper subtitles. It was made by Bruno Oliveiro. The documentary's title is Althusser, an Intellectual Adventure. While watching an interview Althusser gave to Italian TV in April 1980, a few months before the murder, I was struck by how similar his definition of communism sounds like the dish with one spoon treaty, the antithesis of capitalism. In the interview, he defines communism as, quote, a mode of production where there are no economic relationships of exploitation, nor any political relationships of domination. Neither are there ideological relationships of intimidation or pressure, nor of ideological enslavement, unquote. So yes, it does seem to be similar to dish with one spoon kind of a thing, at least to me. Althusser's views on Marxism, communism, anarchism, Catholicism, etc. have been cited as much as his biographies, his writings, and his letters to Helene. Even his dreams and the probable meaning behind them have been dissected. Though Dupuis-Déri laments that Helene has been ignored in the countless discussions on the crime and the man responsible for it, he offers no new insight or passage, save a small biographical paragraph and a bibliography of a published work on what Helene's life was like for 30 years or so with the distinguished man who may or may not have been a pill behind closed doors. Anyways, he says on page 52, quote, what do we know about Helene Legotian today? Almost nothing, except that she was murdered by her illustrious husband. She's ultimately died twice, and her murderer is responsible for both of her deaths. He killed her first with his own hands, and then a second time by occupying the entire public space to talk about himself, under the pretense of addressing her death. A quick web search with Google leads me to see that there is almost no information available about her. Searching for her, in fact, almost inevitably leads us instead to her killer, Althusser, unquote. It's this anger probably that led to many people to contact him after the publication of the French title Althusser Assassin in 2023. It is these people who shed more light into Helene's life and work. Dupuis-Déri includes their feedback in this English translated edition. In his examination, Dupuis-Déri quotes from Althusser's autobiography, The Future Lasts a Long Time. It was published after his death and you must read it as well. Dupuis-Déri calls it filthy on page 51 of Killer Althusser. In the chapter titled Victimization, on page 17, he says, quote, it is a tedious text on a literary level, revolting from a political point of view and disgusting from a psychological perspective, given how the murderer presents himself as a victim, unquote. But this autobiography, as well as the other one, La Fates, The Facts, can be seen as a character study, an historical record, which you, as a reader and an analyst, can choose to believe or disbelieve. The French and English versions of these two autobiographical works are available online. The French version of both books was published by Edition Stock Imec in 1992, and the English version of both was published by Vintage, an imprint of Random House, in 1994. I am double-minded about the extent of Louis Althusser's culpability, because he did have a long history of endless cycle of psychiatric hospitalizations and had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I don't know how he was able to perform his professorship duties amongst this chaos. Except for a doctor who lived near his apartment, none of his students or faculty members knew about his mental health struggles. That's surprising to me. There has never been any investigative expose on his mental health records, medications, or social life. He was 8 years younger than Helene. He was a Catholic and she was Jewish. During World War II, he was in a German prison war camp in Schleswig-Holstein and kept there for almost 5 years. The couple had lived as lovers for more than 30 years before they got married in 1976. His relationship with her is described in various places as strained. I have no doubt he was difficult to live with, though he had a long-term residency and employment in an Ivy League university. She worked as a researcher for an NGO, SEDES, till her retirement. According to Dupuis-Déri, by 1980, Helene had expressed a desire to leave him and had been looking at apartments to move into. Althusser said he had no memory of strangulating her in bed, but does remember massaging her neck in bed. This raises red flags, doesn't it? Is this story a cautionary tale for a woman to make a clean break before officially declaring a separation or breakup, and to not reside with a mentally unstable man who can use his illness as an excuse to get away with an act that is rooted in anger and resentment and inability to let go? An eerie passage from his Future Last's autobiography. Passage is quoted on page 14 of Killer Althusser in the chapter titled Feminist Insights. Althusser says, quote, "I do not know what exactly I put Helene through. I do know, however, that I was truly capable of the most terrible things. But she told me with a determination that terrified me that she could no longer live with me, that in her eyes I was a monster, and that she wanted to leave me for good. She began quite openly to look for a flat, but did not find one immediately. She then made practical arrangements which I found unbearable, totally ignoring me, though I was still there, in our own flat. She got up before me and disappeared for the whole day. If she happened to stay at home, she refused to talk to me, and even to come face to face with me. I was consumed with anguish. As you know, I always experienced intense anguish at being abandoned, and especially by her, but being totally ignored, though I was still there in our own home, was the most unbearable thing of all." Unquote. I think this would be seen as a motive or trigger for the killing by any investigator or prosecutor, and maybe this would have come out if Althusser had ever been allowed to be detained and questioned by the police. But he wasn't. In every available picture, some of which are being displayed on the screen right now, Helene looks like a cute, affable, lovely woman, while Althusser looks, well, doesn't he look like a grouch? And so we find out that after the murder and 3-year hospitalization that ended in 1983, Althusser's teaching days were behind him. He moved away from the university that he had been a part of for the majority of his life. He continued to receive guests, including a former student who was an advisor to then-President Mitterrand. He gave interviews on subjects such as philosophy and psychology. He engaged with the press by writing to them about how they had misinterpreted his work. He read books written on his work. He wrote the autobiographies mentioned before and told his life story to a biographer. Basically, he seems obsessed that he be remembered for his professional work from the 40s to early 80s, than for what happened in his personal life on 16th of November 1980. In the introduction written by Douglas Johnson from the twin autobiographies published in 1994, which I have quoted before in this review, it is mentioned that, quote, "From time to time, in his despair, he would walk in the streets of northern Paris, a shabby, aging figure, and would startle passersby as he would shout, 'I am the great Althusser.' Amidst all this, the revolving cycle of being in and out of hospitals continued, and he died of a heart attack in a hospital." Unquote. In an interview that he gave to Italian TV in April of 1980, a few months before the murder, and I'm using YouTube's auto-translate for this one, he was asked by the interviewer the difference between love and respect, and he replied, quote, "What do you do if you insist I have to love you because Christ asked me to? You run away. But if you have respect for the other, then he will leave you to do whatever you want. If he wants you to love him, then it's fine. But if he doesn't, that's also fine." Unquote. Well, in his case, it proved to be it's easier said than done. It is a bit ironical considering what happened just a few months later. It's terrible to realize that, as Francis Dupuis-Déri says on page 13, quote, "Even today in France, a man kills his spouse or ex-spouse on average every 3 days." Unquote. This thesis-like examination of how Althusser was reported on and written about post-murder adds to the study of this complicated, controversial figure. Two things can coexist at the same time. Althusser's work can be appreciated or debated while condemning the intimate partner violence against Helene. Dupuis-Déri thinks recognizing his professional accomplishments is akin to giving him immunity. What do you think?